Hello, and welcome back to the IT's Her Future Women in Technology podcast. If you wish to reach out to us, please feel free to do so through our email itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. I'm your host Neve, and this week we'll be discussing the topic of subject divides regarding why some subjects are male dominated whilst others are female dominated. We'll be discussing how this gender split occurs in relatively early years such as GCSEs, and that by the time students get to degree level, this split is exacerbated. Our guests today will be James and Thusa. So, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I studied chemistry with forensic science at university, and I think there were more males in my year, but it was not by a lot. I personally picked my degree because from a very young age I had been interested in forensics, so all through my secondary education it was just in my head that when I went to university I wanted to study forensics or chemistry, and in my case a mix of the two. Currently, my role is as a graduate consultant in Microsoft Dynamics 365 in finance and operations. So why don't we just go around and introduce ourselves with your degree and what your subject was, and if you noticed there was any gender that outweighed the other, as well as what your current role is. So Thusa, would you like to go first?
My name is Thusa and I'm a graduate consultant, and I studied chemical engineering at university, and there was definitely more males than females in my year group and across all year groups doing chemical engineering. It was more like 30 to 40%, which is not too bad compared to things like engineering and physics. And I am currently in the Azure team and working with really cool stuff with cloud and migration.
Great, thank you, Thusa. And James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I'm James and I work for KPMG International. I'm senior manager there in information security. I didn't do a science type degree at university, so it was a while ago now, but I did an arts Bachelor of Arts degree. It was war studies, which is quite an unusual one, mixture of politics, history, social science at King's College London. For me, it was following a passion I had of loving history at school. So that's why I went and did that course. Came out of university not knowing what I wanted to do, but had a fairly strong IT background from being at school and kind of just fell into an IT department. So for me, that was my route into IT and then on to cybersecurity and information security.
Great, thank you both for introducing yourselves. So research has shown that subject choices are determined by gender from young ages. For example, boys are more likely to choose STEM subjects and girls are more likely to choose humanities. So have you seen this growing up, and why do you think this happens? James, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So first caveat from myself is I went to a boys' grammar school. So in some ways, it was what was normal for us. The three sciences done separately, IT and computing was available to us. We were twinned with the local girls' grammar schools as well. And I think my observation, and again, this is looking back quite some time ago, we're talking 2 decades ago. So obviously things have changed and moved on, but definitely the split between the girls' schools and the boys' schools were generally that three sciences were done at the boys' schools. There's kind of a grouping together in the girls' schools. The IT facilities were much stronger in the boys' schools. And you noticed that split, and it might be partly down to what people wanted to do in terms of demand, but it certainly didn't help, I think, that there seemed to be boys' subjects and girls' subjects at that age.
And Thusa, what have you found in your experience?
Yeah, so James, it's interesting how you mentioned you went to a boys' school, because I went to an only girls' school for secondary, and there was also a boys' school nearby. So when I was at the girls' school, obviously there were no boys for us to compare against. However, when I left the girls' school and for sixth form I went to a mixed school, I saw the biggest difference because I felt like during my 5 years from year 7 to 11, I was very comfortable sharing my ideas. I was happy. There was no competition really. And then until I went to the sixth form, I found out I was a bit shocked by how loud the boys were. I think that was the first thing I noticed, that the boys were very loud and the girls tended to be a bit shyer, and I sort of naturally went along with that as well and became a bit more conservative. about sharing my ideas and stuff. So that was something really interesting I saw like changing as I moved from the two schools. But also, I think in the girls we had girl subjects. For example, like you can take food technology and you can take textiles. But in the boys' school, you have computer science, which wasn't offered with us. Those were the biggest differences I saw. But also during my A-levels with the boys, in my first year of sixth form, there was a large group of girls and boys doing mathematics. And then suddenly in my second year, when maths became a lot harder, I eventually became the only girl in the class. So I didn't realize it was happening throughout the years, but that was quite interesting to see how it all turned out.
I think that's some really interesting perspectives, because for secondary school, I also went to an all-girls school. And then for sixth form, I went to a sixth form that was attached to an all-boys school, but the sixth form was mixed. But the ratios were still very off. I think in my year, I think it was about 10 girls in first year to about 70 boys. It was quite overwhelming on that first day, especially after being separated for 5 years. I walked in and was like, I am surrounded by men. It was a bit of a shock. And I agree, Thuza, what you said about the maths class. I know by second year in my chemistry class, there was 3 girls, including me. So the next question is referring to the gender gap in education. And the gender gap refers to the fact that girls get better GCSE and A-level results than boys in practically every subject. And women are much more likely to go to university than men. Do you think this gender gap at A-level and degree level contributes to the stigma around working in tech being only for boys? So Thuza, would you like to give your input first?
Yeah, sure. That's also quite interesting because even though girls are doing well across the board and also including the STEM subjects, well, we're not getting enough girls applying to be in those techie roles and IT. I think it could go down to like the stigma and like the perception we have around what girls are expected to do in terms of their jobs and what boys are expected to do or what boys tend to do. For example, I think for a girl applying to go into a tech field, I think they would know that it's going to be heavily male dominated. So they could become intimidated by that fact. And I think for me, for example, I sometimes did feel intimidated. I did feel sometimes like, oh, what if I can't fit in? Because the average person working in that field they fall into a certain category that I may never fall into that category because I'm just not that sort of person. I'm not a boy. I'm not this, I'm not that. So it could put them off, and that could be why. But also, I think historically, we don't have a lot of, for example, I found out that like the Fields Medal winner, which is like a Nobel Prize for mathematics, there's only ever been one female, and she's not even European, she's from Iran. And so I think historically, especially in Europe, we don't get many female representatives, or there's a legacy of exclusion for women in STEM achieving really good things and inspiring other women. So I think in a way we are doing well, but we are sort of lagging. We are going very slowly in bringing more women.
Thank you for your input, Thuza. I do agree with what you said. It is hard to find role models from a younger age to look up to. So James, what do you think contributes to this gender gap in education?
So certainly, yeah, I couldn't agree more on the role models. I think that's a very valid point, and how much that determines what is then offered by your school. Certainly in the case of all of us in this podcast where we went to gender specific schools until A level, you could see it would be subject offering. But I think one of the things I'd love to understand more, and I think we're moving to this kind of more dynamic way of understanding how we learn best, as certainly how we can get children learning at their best as well, is appreciating the different learning styles. And I don't necessarily think that it should be the case that there shouldn't be a gender gap with girls scoring higher in test results necessarily. I think we should see parity if we've got the learning delivery correct. And I guess why I'm bringing that up is I wonder if boys tend to lean towards learning through doing as a generalization. Whereas actually a lot of the testing that happens in terms of exams and so on is very much about applying knowledge, and it's a very different learning style. And I think it's great that there has been a tipping of the balance, because obviously you go back a number of decades, and certainly it was male dominated at universities, and it's good to see that flip. But I think we need to sort of get to that stage where we're understanding the different learning styles of boys and girls, and it's not necessarily a neat gender divide, because there'll be exceptions that in terms of how people prefer to learn. But if there is a generalization that some people learn best by doing, well, it makes sense that they might gravitate more towards subjects that involve experimentations, that involve getting your hands dirty, that involve projects and so on and so forth, which a lot of the STEM subjects do. I think what would be maybe an interesting, if there wasn't the stigma attached to it potentially in terms of what is a girl's subject and what's a boy's subject, it'd be probably quite interesting to know how many boys would take up things like food technology, because that would be a good example of a very much a hands getting dirty, as it were, subject, but it's not necessarily offered at a boys' school. But so that's probably where I'm quite interested in understanding the learning styles. I think that does get reinforced. Probably that's the other thing I'd notice in terms of that gender gap, because certainly in tech, and wind back the clock a couple of decades when I was at school, what we enjoyed doing outside of school was kicking a ball around, being physical, but then also maybe getting onto the games console and shooting each other, or racing games, or whatever it might be, which are very targeted towards boys in general. Again, I think the gaming industry has got better. Things like Minecraft and other things, I think, get more of a gender balance of interest in there. But again, it's not just the game itself when it comes to tech. A lot of these games have these glitches or modifications and little bits that you can uncover by discovering quirks to the game. And that's, again, it's developing exactly the right mindset for the people the people who may want to go into computing and cybersecurity. But if you're not interested in gaming, you're maybe on the back foot there. So I can kind of see how the environment from a very early age is shaping the gender draw to certainly cybersecurity and computing.
I think you made a really interesting point that I personally hadn't ever considered before, to do with the gaming aspect and the targeted hobbies for boys, and that is a start to interest. I know some of my friends who are doing computing are like, yeah, from a young age I really enjoyed this game and I did that, and it feeds into it. Whereas I only really found my interest in chemistry once I did start secondary school, because that's when you properly start learning the sciences as chemistry, biology and physics, not just it's science today. And I do agree about the food tech. I think that would be a really interesting thing, as it is a hands-on subject. I've personally brought up before where they always say cooking's for women, but if you look at chefs, a lot of the famous chefs are men. I find it very hard to think of a famous chef who is a woman. Thusa, do you have anything you'd like to add from James's point?
It's really interesting how you did bring up gaming and early childhood, how that can shape what you choose to do in the future. Even when it comes to toys, since you can have toys for boys and toys for girls, you have these blue, pink, all that. But I think that could, in a way, unintentionally shape the mindset as children are growing up. And then if a girl has never been handed over, for example, a game console, she would have never had the chance to explore and find out, oh, gaming is actually really cool.
So we've already been touching on this a little bit with our discussion, but what do you think is something that can be done to encourage more young women into technology roles, or just to pursue STEM subjects, in your opinion? James, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I think, first off, I think there is a bit of a gap when it comes to the teaching. First off, we need the teachers, we need the people who have that subject as a background to be able to teach it well and inspire children to take up those subjects. Certainly when I did history, if I think one of the motivating parts for me there, in fact, probably all of my subjects, computing and maths that I did at A level, it was down to good teachers that got me really inspired by the subject. So that is really important, and we are letting our kids we're letting children down in general if we haven't got the teaching capability. And there's certainly, when it comes to the STEM subjects, there aren't enough teachers that do STEM. That's certainly been recognised, and we've got a skills gap in cybersecurity. There's not enough people to fill the vacancies, let alone teach subjects like that. So that's going to be a core issue. I think there's a lot happening in terms of, certainly, I'm speaking from sort of my area of knowledge in terms of information security, cyber. There's a lot more connections to industry happening now. So certainly seeing, much more diversity in terms of apprenticeships and time with industry, and reaching out to schools and providing support groups spinning up that help get people into these subjects at an earlier age. Certainly in Scotland, there are some groups that, if I can call out, Dress Code is a great example of a charity that's working in Scotland to inspire girls into computer science and cybersecurity. And it requires that level of intervention, because otherwise, that lack of support, that lack of, if the teachers aren't there fully, we've got to have these other support structures that will support and get people onto like coding camps or taking part in coding competitions or whatever it might be, that will inspire them to think, actually, this is a subject which I enjoy, I've been exposed to, and I want to take that on. So there's lots more that can be done. Certainly, I'm seeing that happening more in the field of cybersecurity. I think it needs to probably happen a lot broader with STEM in general. I know KPMG does a lot when it comes to sort of numeracy day and trying to get children into the maths and inspired by that, because it's a hard sell at the moment. And, it needs that intervention.
I think your point about the teachers was really interesting. A good teacher can make or break your love for a subject. I know I really enjoyed history at sixth form, but I didn't like one of my teachers, and it made me not want to engage as much. And I know I handed in homework later and I prioritized other things because I just didn't have that connection anymore. So Thusa, what do you think can be done to help young women pursue technology roles?
So I think James and Neve, what you guys said are absolutely correct. The teachers do play a significant role, and not in just drawing more girls into STEM subjects and making sure they enjoy them, but encouraging the students that they have currently are interested in the subjects to continue with it, especially at university. So I've gone to university to study chemical engineering because I really enjoy it, and I think it would be a good fit, and I was very passionate at the beginning, and at the end I wasn't that very passionate anymore, because throughout the years it's been very tough, it's been very rigorous and very competitive, and I realized, oh well, I want to do something new, and I'm glad I'm where I am now. However, I think a lot of girls do go into STEM subjects and they push through, but they also need support from their teachers, because one of my personal experiences is when we were in a small group seminar, and there's one supervisor and there are like 4 or 5 students, including myself. And so we were going through a list of problems one by one, and the supervisor just happened to love picking on students to answer questions. And then throughout the supervision, the supervisor goes, okay, well, question number 5, let's see what the female thinks. And I'm suddenly like, female? Wait, that's me. And I was surprised, because I was like, oh, wait, I forgot that I was the only female in the group, but I didn't need to. In the moment I was just shocked, and I didn't think it was like, I wasn't offended or anything, but I was just shocked that like, oh well, I'm the only female, but okay, I didn't need to be addressed like that. So like those sort of things do lead up, and it could discourage women who are already pursuing STEM subjects to eventually give up. So I think it's very, very important, the role, like to understand that teachers do play a significant role.
Sorry, my eyes widened when you said that as well. Incredible, isn't it? We're very impressionable when we're at a young age. I think that's the other key thing to sort of say. We're asking children to make huge life decisions at very young ages based on the subjects they pick. And these little nuances of how the teacher addresses you, or whether you're made to feel welcome, there's so much that can affect people's choices. yeah, just blows me away.
Yeah,
We
because
make it difficult.
yeah, well, because you are already aware that there is a gender inequality, especially in those STEM subjects. Like, you don't need to be constantly pointing out, oh, well, it amplifies the division that there already is.
I agree, that was quite shocking to hear, Thuza, especially considering both of our times at university were quite recent. You would have hoped that this isn't a story you'd still be hearing. So for our final question, I'd just like you to give a piece of advice that you would give to students who are looking to go into technology but might not be studying computer science and think this is a barrier. So James, would you like to go first?
Sure. So, I mean, I've travelled this path to a certain extent. I did computing at A level, but I did a Bachelor of Arts War Studies at university. So I've trod this path, albeit a while ago when I set out on that journey. And things have progressed so much more as well. Mine was probably more of a lucky break into IT, but there are so many more structures there. So I'd say you don't need to have the computer science degree to get into it. You need to be interested for sure, but there is a huge skills gap. There are not enough people to take on the number of roles we have. So as a result, there is so much opportunities being thrown at individuals all over the place. And it's just looking and identifying those. So it might be apprenticeships. Certainly, I've seen graduate apprenticeships where you can get your degree course paid for you and go in that way whilst earning money in a job. There are various camps that you can attend or conferences or particular things that are geared up to all ages, from being at school or being a graduate or wanting to change career direction. There's a lot of these opportunities that will help you navigate the world that is tech, because it's broad and there are plenty of different things, and you've got to find what's going to inspire you and ultimately get you up each day feeling like, yeah, this is something I want to do. I think once you've identified it, it's understanding from that particular specialism or area of tech that you're interested in, what are the courses, what are the things, what are the learning aspects that you need to do to be a success in that area. I've moved from IT into information security, and I've done a whole variety of different courses, but taking those opportunities when they come and hopefully getting them paid by your employer is very helpful, because they do tend to be quite expensive. But there are lots of opportunities where funding comes from either the people you're working with or from various government initiatives. So it's identifying these opportunities, speaking to people who are in the industry, because they can help you with that as well.
Thank you for that advice. I think a point to make is that tech is broad, and that can both be a positive and a negative. It can be negative because from the outside it seems almost impenetrable, but once you are in, there are so many different flavors you can pick from. I know all three of us have very different jobs from each other, but we all work in tech, so it would be. So Thuza, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so the world of IT and technology is huge. So just sit down and go onto Google or Bing, and there's a whole load of information that you can find online. You speak to people, find out who you know is in technology, and go onto LinkedIn, connect with people, just try and find as much information as possible, because you're applying to a job that you don't necessarily have experience for yet. I would advise that you do a lot of research, but also at the same time, don't read too much into job descriptions, because they are not entirely correct. They could be quite biased. Also, just be confident. If you're interested in something, if you want to go for it, just go for it. And what's the worst that can happen, really?
Can I just build on that, Thuza? When you said about the job descriptions, tech seems to be notoriously bad at this. I don't know if it's because other people are writing these job descriptions and these adverts, often targeted towards an entry-level position, and they're asking for sort of 10 years experience and 5 courses and whatever it is that lifts the bar impossibly. And again, that plays into the gender stereotype, because I've heard as a gender stereotype, it appears to be the case that when a male applicant meets some of the criteria, they'll just go for it, whereas a female applicant feels they need to meet the whole of the criteria. So as long as we have these ridiculous recruitment asks that permeate the industry, you're going to get a male-dominated environment, because women will look at it and say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I haven't met 100% of the requirements. So that does need to change. That's a really terrible indictment of the tech industry. But I suppose from where we are in terms of the advice part of this podcast, I think it's being confident, knowing that these job descriptions are written quite badly. So just have a go, as Thusa said. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you both. I think that's a really positive point to end this podcast on. So thank you so much, Thusa and James, for talking with me today. I hope the listeners have enjoyed hearing your points of view and the insights that you've given, and hopefully we've alleviated some fears if you are thinking about going into a STEM subject, but you are worried about it being male-dominated. If you think a career in tech or within KPMG is for you, please go to our website, www.kpmgcareers.co.uk. And if you wish to reach out to us, IT's Her Future, to ask any questions, or if you have any topics you think we should cover, the email's itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. Thank you for listening.